has no idea what they are, or that is a separate, completely separate thing from the county. Because even those of you who have advisory boards, you know, you're still, as an advisory board, you're still the county. And so, you know, the trick there is to make sure that everyone on your advisory committee has been properly put on that advisory committee by the board, that they've named you onto the advisory committee, or if you do it through a volunteer process, that you're properly identified as a volunteer, so that when the county gets sued, when the fair board gets sued, that every member of that of your board is going to be defended and covered by the county. Okay?
And volunteers too, they would be covered as well.
Volunteers as well. We'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about board member liability.
What I guess my question was, like, we're county, but I have that great group of folks that are all volunteer, and so we're all covered the same, right?
Well, if you follow through the process.
Okay.
So we'll talk about the process
Okay.
and the requirements there under the statute to protect the volunteers. So, I forgot I wanted to go through around the room real quick this morning, because I know that a lot of you know each other and work with each other, but I do want to make sure that again, we all know who each other are and where we come from and what we're doing. So why don't we start in the back and not with Beaver and introduce ourselves.
We should start with Beaver.
And what role we play in the county fair and county events.
Wendy.
Charlene?
Okay, well, I'm Charlene Lamp, and I'm risk management for Davis County. And I just kind of bother them.
I'm Rhonda Peterson with the Carbon County Fairgrounds and Event Center, but part of my job is to oversee the fair, 4th of July celebrations, all of the celebrations that the county puts on.
I'm Jennifer Graham. I'm with the Golden Spike Event Center and Weaver County Parks and Recs. And when it comes to the fair, I work for Jan. So.
I'm her boss 4 days out of the year. I'm Jan Wilson, and I'm the special event manager for Weaver County.
I'm Jody Wargeson. I'm a county attorney for Washington County, and I sort of advise the fair, but I feel like Wendy knows way more than me. So.
I'm Allison Webb. I'm the Weaver County attorney.
I'm Dave Hansen. I'm the Legacy Event Center department head.
I'm Brooke Spur, and I'm the Davis County Fair coordinator.
I'm Lee Sandberg, Washington County Fair Director.
Joelle Rowley, Wasatch County. I'm the risk manager of the county.
I'm Debbie General of the fair.
I'm Joanne Evans. I'm the risk coordinator for
Houston County.
I'm Crystal Holt, and I work in human resources and risk management for San Juan County.
Dave Wilson, County Attorney's Office.
I'm Paula Martin. I'm the Weaver County Events Coordinator. So I'm the fair director and other events like the Home Festival and some other stuff.
Yvonne Buchanan, Superior County, maintenance at the fairgrounds.
I'm Jan Rose. I'm Fox River County. I've got the fairgrounds and the fair. I'm the event coordinator.
I'm
Neil.
dark, gentleman in the back.
I'm Neil Geddes. I'm with the Davis County Attorney's Office.
And he bothers us.
So good. We've got a really good group, risk managers, county attorney's office, the facilities managers, the events people, planning the events themselves. So it's a good group of varied responsibilities to help us through our discussions today. So as we look at and went through this process and tried to identify, and some of you we even questioned, we're kind of the county, we're kind of the advisory, we're kind of the good old group. Asking yourself that question about yourselves, the next step that I want you to do as you go back and you start working with all the different groups that you're going to contract with to pull off the fair this year is ask that same question about the person sitting across the table from you. Who are they? I heard somebody mention that they put on the 4th of July event. right? How many of you know for an absolute fact that the group that puts on the big 4th of July event asks the county to give them some money so that they can have the fireworks and put on the big event for the 4th of July, that you know absolutely certain that they are a legitimate corporation with an insurance policy in place? Because I rarely see that. They are almost always the good group of folks and not any type of legal entity. So ask this question about all those people that you work with as well, is what exactly are they? And so you know what your relationship should be with them. Okay. From there, we'll go to this question. One of the major areas of authority that you would have or not have as an entity of the county. And again, because we're all either the county, actually the county, or an advisory group to the county, this discussion will be a little bit easier. Again, as we look at procurement, this is an area that is becoming more and more complex. There was a bill in the legislature again this year that substantially changed and made more difficult the process to purchase things by the state, which also affects counties unless you pass your own ordinance. So let's look at a few things, ask ourselves a few questions, again, to try and figure out whether or not we are doing our purchasing as a fair organization correctly. First of all, we've answered the question of what's our relationship to the county. We're going to say that we all, for this practice, we are the county. So however the county has devised to be able to legally purchase things, that's the way the fair would need to go through about that process. Okay? Because you are expending public funds. And if you were a separate legal entity taking donations in or spending last year's reserves, things like that, you may be able to get out from under this one that those may not be public funds. But again, if you're operating as part of the county, they're going to be considered public funds, and so you're going to need to follow the procurement requirements in the statute. This is the next question that is a question not just for the fair groups, but for all the counties as well, is does the county have its own procurement code that's been passed by ordinance? How many of you know that for a fact, that your county has done that? Not a policy. Policy doesn't count. A code put in place by ordinance. Because that's the language in the statute at this point. And I know that there are many counties that just simply have a purchasing policy. We gave it to them like 15 years ago, that they operate under, but at this point they can't use that to purchase any longer. If they don't have a code passed by ordinance, they must follow the State Procurement Act, which is incredibly hand-tying. You won't ever get anything done. So that's your first bit of homework when you get home, is to make sure that your county has actually passed an ordinance with a procurement code. And of course, then you need to make sure that you understand what the procurement code, how it lays out your process to purchase things, and what authority that code provides you as the fair organization, or as a department head, or as a person being paid a stipend and given certain responsibilities by the county commission, so that as you make these purchases, you know that you're doing it and have the proper authority under the state law to be making purchases. How many of you are bidding for goods and services now? So when you're looking at who's going to drop the portable toilets, you bid that out to the different vendors. Because again, most likely that's one of the types of services that is gonna be expensive enough over a 2 or 3 day period that it will meet the requirements to have to be bid out. You can't just go out and select a local guy to do it. It needs to be bid out. And you need to look at your own county's procurement code and determine what that threshold is of how much the cost is before it has to be bid out. Jen, did you have a question? Because generally that limitation is set at somewhere to $2,500, $5,000, something along those lines, and if it's more than that, it needs to be bid out. And don't think that you can contract for it each day of the fair separately in order to keep under that dollar threshold. That would be a Class B misdemeanor, I believe it is currently under the statute, to intentionally divide a contract up into smaller pieces in order to have it fit underneath the requirement to go out to bid. So, am I ruining your morning right off the start? Yeah. But again, these are the types of attacks that people will make against the county to try and say that they shouldn't be operating the fair because the fair is not doing things the way that they're supposed to. So, probably not something that you need to shut down everything you're doing for the fair this year, but you definitely want to be sitting down with the county attorney's office, identifying, getting a copy of your county's ordinance for purchases and reviewing that with everyone that you work with for your events to make sure that everybody understands what can be purchased with telephone bids, what has to go out to a full RFP bid process, what other areas do you have that might have exception where you won't need to go out for bid. It certainly makes it very difficult. I attended the statewide association conference a couple months ago, and walked through the vendor booths, and everybody's, all the musicians and other entertainers are trying to get you to sign them up for your fair this year. And that was one of my first thoughts: is are the counties just simply walking up and signing a deal with an entertainer?
Yes, because you can't bid out an entertainer.
I realized that until the state legislature.
On availability and and localized, and is that really what you're saying?
Well, again, you're going to have to look at your code in Washington County. Jody, do you know the code well enough in Washington County to?
I think we'll have to look at it. I'm not gonna say off the top of my head.
Nothing would ever get done as quick as we need it to get done.
Exactly.
Okay, sorry,
And we can work through those processes,
Well,
but
yeah, you would lose on that.
again, because you can work your way into being able to contract with the entertainers that are available on those dates, that are within your price, your budget and things like that. But you need to make those types of exceptions in the code when it's being adopted by the county. So if you look at your current code now, and maybe the entertainers are below what your county has set for that threshold, where you don't need to go out to full bid.
It's whatever the amount is.
That's one of the things that you want to consider, is
Not
what the amount is.
necessarily.
The other is
I don't bid out my derby because there's only how many people in the state that can do it.
right. The other would be more or less a sole source type situation. Most ordinances that counties would adopt would make deference to a sole source provider. That there is only one derby company that's available